Good evening or afternoon. I was just trying to see how many of you are in the US or anywhere else in the world. My name is Heidi Carmen Howard, and I am a researcher at the Center for Research Ethics and Bioethics here in Uppsala, just outside of Stockholm in Sweden, so it's 8:45 for me. And today I'll be talking to you about the ethical aspects of direct-to-consumer genetic testing. So I've got a very basic outline for you today, really going over the topic quite generally. And so I really encourage you to write out any questions that you have as I'm talking. I won't answer them as I'm talking because I can't really multitask that much, but I will address them with the Q&A. And also I have tried to make this talk into 30 minutes, but there's so many things to talk about. So to do that, I have to just go over some things quite superficially. So please, if you want to talk more about some things, we can do that in the Q&A, okay? So first of all, a description of direct-to-consumer genetic testing. It's a basic type of commercial offer of DNA testing, but instead of being offered to labs or to healthcare institutions, it's being offered directly to the public, to the general public, who are not necessarily patients, right? They're consumers, they're people who want genetic tests, but they're not necessarily sick. And the offer here is, like I said, direct to consumer, but what's also interesting is that the advertising is direct to consumer, and it's outside the traditional healthcare system, although there are some collaborations now between some companies and academic institutions and hospitals, but that's new and it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But in general, the companies are completely outside of the healthcare system. There's variable contact with physicians. So some companies ask consumers to order a test via a physician, but this is actually quite new. When these companies came on the scene in 2007, 2008, most companies had no physicians involved, and that was the whole idea, is that consumers could go ahead and just buy the tests from companies without anybody telling them they couldn't, basically. And of course, it's for profit, right? It's a for-profit business. So what kind of tests are being sold? A whole bunch of different types of tests, from health-related tests or disease-related tests, including monogenic and complex disorders, as well as non-disease related, such as genealogy, ancestry, pharmacogenomics, paternity, and carrier testing, although some people would put that in the health category. But as you can see, there's just a lot. And then also there are different packages, or the tests are sold in different ways. So some companies, few of them, we don't tend to talk about those a lot, but we probably should, offer single gene tests. And I'll show you one of these companies in a second. So just one test in one gene, and they give you back the results for one disorder. Other companies sell multi-tests, like tens or dozens of tests, where it might be under one type of disorder. So a cardio package, they might call it, and they might test for 12 genes and maybe 24 mutations, something like that, or a different permutation, but it's still a small number. Then we have genome-wide tests that are being offered, and this is probably the category that has been talked about the most in the news, because one of the companies, the most popular companies, 23andMe, offers this type of testing. And it's where they test for hundreds of thousands to millions of different SNPs throughout the whole genome. And then they give back results for many, many phenotypes, over 50 and up to over 200 phenotypes are discussed in the results. And now more recently, some companies are offering whole genome sequencing. So the whole genome is sequenced and the results are given back to the consumer. And this is quite new, and some companies are even offering just raw data, no interpretation. So there's basically a lot of variation in the companies, okay? So I'm pointing that out now because if you're going to discuss this further, if you're going to read an article, etc., you should really know what kind of company you're talking about. Because especially for the ethical issues and regulatory issues, the details matter. So this is how it works in general for a consumer. They'd go on the internet, they'd buy a test on the internet, they would receive a kit at home and collect saliva in that kit, send it back to the company or to the lab the company deals with, where the DNA would be extracted from the saliva and the DNA would be analyzed. And the results would be returned to the consumer, usually via the internet. And these are examples of what a consumer could get back. So in your in the first column on the left are phenotypes, and they happen to all be disease phenotypes. This is an example from 23andMe. And we're going to go now straight to the third column where you see risks. They are percentage risks, and that would be the risk of the consumer who had their DNA analyzed. The next column, the fourth one, is the average risk to the population. So you can see, I think, in this example where the consumer actually has all their risks for all these diseases happen to be over the average population risk. And so this is an example of how the results can be returned, and they've actually changed. Even one company has changed a bit how they return them, but they're supposed to be reader-friendly, and to some extent they are. How much consumers actually understand these results and this information is a huge concern, and we'll talk about that in a second. Here's just a different way, a different company, Navigenics, which actually does not sell this type of testing anymore, but it gives you an idea of how they would return the testing. And you can see that, again, they were given, the consumers given their risk based on the algorithm that the company used, which is also different for different companies, the risk algorithm, and the average population risk for any one phenotype. Okay, so what are the companies? There are a lot of different companies, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just to say that, again, lots of differences. And this is a bit outdated. It was made by the Genetics and Public Policy Center. It was put together by them already in 2011. And you can see 27 companies here. You're not meant to read them, if you can, but they had already at that point started separating the types of companies that involved healthcare professionals and those that didn't. So that was already a trend 3 years ago, although it wasn't when the company started in 2007, 2008. What's more interesting about this list, and it goes on for many pages, is across the top. Again, not for you to read, but if you could just look across the columns on the top, those are the phenotypes. And these are just the A's. Okay, so a lot of common complex disorders here. There's Alzheimer's in here. There's alcohol flushing syndrome. Interestingly, there's also ALS. I think it was only one company who was offering that, this one here. Anyway, so a lot of different phenotypes, and there's many pages of these phenotypes. So that gives you an idea of what's out there. And there are many, many more. When we compiled a list, myself and colleagues at the University of Leuven in Belgium and in Toulouse, in CERN in France, we had, I think, over 60 companies, and there's many more. Some people have lists of hundreds. It depends on who you include in that list, because if you include companies that sell ancestry testing and compatibility testing for dating, they do exist, as well as not just the mother company, but all the little, how do you call those, the sub companies, which is really one and the same, but they might function in different countries, then the list can go very high very fast. So to say there's a lot out there. So here are some examples of companies that no longer operate, but they were very popular when they were operating, and they kind of set the tone. So Lumigenix, deCODE Me. So deCODE still exists, but their service deCODE Me, which was the direct-to-consumer part of their company, is not offered anymore. And Navigenics, who were bought by, I forget the name now, but it'll come back to me. They're not selling their direct-to-consumer service either. Companies who continue to sell their services are GenePlanet, and this is genome-wide testing, by the way. This is really the most commonly discussed type of company, those selling testing for hundreds of thousands to 1 million SNPs and then returning the results from many phenotypes. So GenePlanet, Pathwagenomics, and of course 23andMe, who you may know no longer in fact sells their health-related genome testing since December, when the FDA asked them for more evidence about the efficacy and the safety of their testing, as it was considered medical testing. So I might not have time to go into that more at the end. We're going to talk about guidelines and regulations, but really quickly. So if I'm not a lawyer and I don't know all the details about the US, but we could discuss that also a bit more at the end. So this is a company that I love to hate called Graceful Earth, and it sells one gene test. I don't know if you can see it, and I have forgotten now how to point out, but it's the upper left-hand side. It says Alzheimer's testing. So they sell one test for ApoE, and they return the results for Alzheimer's testing. And this is one of the first companies I studied back in 2007. I did content analysis, and I just looked at the site again before this talk, and it was exactly the same. Nothing has changed. It does give information about ApoE and Alzheimer's, but really basic information. Nothing as sophisticated, and this is not an advertisement, of course, but as some of the other companies that I've shown you who really try to educate the consumers. And even with that education, we still have a lot of concerns, which I'll get to soon. So you can imagine for this company that just sells one test, you think, oh, maybe that's better. But in fact, there's barely any information for the consumer. Very strict information. It's there, but it's very basic. And also, it's not a very, you wonder how much this company knows about what they're selling, because they're also selling pet hair analysis and some vitamins and supplements. So it doesn't look so serious. And the quality of this company, of course, is questionable. So again, lots of variation, okay? I don't know if I've mentioned that enough, but a lot of variations in the companies and what they sell and how they sell it. So that being said, now I'm going to generalize. What are some of the pros of having direct-to-consumer genetic companies out there? So these are pros that not everybody agrees with, but I'm just going to put them out there as potential pros. So the companies increase the access or make the access easier for genetic testing. Whether that is a need the population had to begin with is another question. Yes. They can also, these companies being out there can help improve consumer health. That's what they say themselves. They say that if consumers have their genetic risk information, they will be motivated to change their lifestyle, live healthier, and prevent the development of some disease. Other people say that consumers have a right to their genomic information. No. And so companies existing fulfill this right. Another idea has been that these companies democratize genomics. Unfortunately, the use of this term has been a bit warped in that they don't usually mean that the consumers have power or any real say, although one could say that they vote with their money, they vote with what they buy. However, it's not true that consumers necessarily have more power, and if you want to, we could discuss that a bit more with 23andMe, who have tried to involve patients or consumers in their research, and they've tried anyway, and we can discuss that. But usually, democratization of genomics really just means increased access. That's how most people use it. Last two reasons are ones that I personally believe in, and they have to do with increasing awareness and education of genetics and genomics, definitely with clinicians and non-genetic clinicians, non-genetic researchers, and one would think or hope in the public in general, and I think that would be a very good thing. If we're really serious about having genomic medicine in the future, then the education of the public will have to really increase exponentially. So if companies offer this education to them, then that would be very good. And I wonder, what if 23andMe does for genomics what Steve Jobs did for personal computers? Assuming that we understand how to use our computers, that could potentially be a really good thing, potentially. And finally, it has motivated stakeholders in genomics and genetics to really think and to rethink and to get out of the mold that we had originally about how we offer genetic testing, how we thought of it, how we thought people should have access to it, etc. So it's kind of a revamping, and that I think is a good thing. I'm going to skip over the rhetoric of the companies very quick, just to say that's a bit confusing. Some companies say, this is just for fun, i.e. you don't need to regulate me, I'm not selling medical information. But on the other side, they're telling people that if they buy the tests, it could be really useful for their health and it could prevent disease. So the rhetoric of some companies is a bit confusing. I'm going to go straight to the just take home ideas of direct-to-consumer genetic testing, and then I'll jump into the ELSI for the last 10 minutes. So these services are really offered through the internet, which makes it difficult, can make it difficult to regulate. It started especially in the US, but it's definitely increasing throughout Europe now and in Asia, although that might change in the future. I'll get to that in a second. The size of the market remains unknown, but a lot of companies are not making it, and others that are still in business are definitely needing a lot of funding outside of what they're able to make from their sales. Especially true for the companies that only sell DTC services and don't actually have testing services for laboratories or other healthcare institutions like deCODE, let's say. But even they to continue. So again, very heterogeneous group of companies and offers and types of tests. The role of healthcare professional varies, and that is very important when you're talking about issues of consent and genetic counseling and understanding of the consumer. And if you think about it, although I think all of you are in the US, I see we're up to 46 now, but a lot of you are in the US where you're allowed to advertise for prescription drugs, but in a lot of most companies, you're not. And in fact, if you look at the direct advertisement of genetic testing to consumers, even in the case in which every company involved a healthcare professional, we could still see some problems, and those problems would be similar to those that we see with the advertisement of prescription drugs directly to consumers. Something to keep in mind. And this last point, I'm not going to explain in depth, although I love to, but people seem to confuse the notion of direct-to-consumer genetic testing with personalized medicine. Of course, they're related, but they're not synonymous. And maybe part of the reason for that is that another term for direct-to-consumer genetic testing is personal genomic services or personal genome testing. So maybe the word person in there confuses people, but they're definitely separate entities and related but separate. So something to keep in mind in the future. So some concerns. I'm going to have a lot of them, and I could talk about them for a long time, but I won't. I'll keep it short. So a bit superficial. Get back to me in the questions. And for these lists of concerns, because I know a lot of people like direct-to-consumer genetic testing, you have to keep in mind that these are concerns that live in the minds of some stakeholders and not in others. So it's really, concern lies in the eyes of the beholder, basically. So this is a list, and I will skip it right away because we're going to get down to it. So we start with scientific concerns, and I could go through analytic validity, clinical validity, and clinical utility, but we're actually just going to look at the last two, because the analytic validity, although it has been discussed, and it was in fact discussed in the letter from the FDA to 23andMe, many companies are actually using the same platforms as is being used for research and for diagnostics in healthcare institutions. So this may be true of some companies, but definitely not all, the concerns of analytic validity. So I'm going to, and it hasn't really been discussed as a huge worry, so I'm going to skip it. Clinical validity has been a huge discussion. Basically, the idea is that the association between a variant and a disorder, that degree of association, how strong that association is, basically gives you the clinical validity. And for complex traits, we know that the association, the clinical validity, could be very weak. In other terms, if you wish, the penetrance may not be very high, although I don't like to use that with complex traits, but still. So with clinical validity, if the association between the variant and the phenotype is unknown, is very low, or is just uncertain, giving that information back to a consumer is very confusing. What does it mean for them? And basically, a lot of the tests that are being given by companies, that are being offered by companies, are not being offered in the clinical setting because they didn't feel they were valid in this sense. And so there's concern that they shouldn't be offered either to consumers, especially without proper supervision or genetic counseling, which I will get to in a second. Clinical utility is also an issue here. The question is, why give a test if there's no utility to it, if there's nothing that can be done once you get the information? If you get the genetic test result, can you do something actively? Could you take a medication or change your lifestyle so you can make sure that you don't get a disorder? And even if you do, even if there is clinical utility, there are two questions. One, will consumers change their way of life, eat better, exercise, etc., to not develop a disorder? And number two, did the genetic test really give them extra information? People who are overweight usually already know they're overweight. People who don't eat well already know they don't eat well. So the clinical utility of some of these tests, even if it is there, is still debatable in the larger sense. So yes, I'm going to move on now. We could say a lot more. So I already mentioned that there's a lack, or people feel there's a lack of adequate genetic counseling and medical supervision. And as you know, genetic counseling is recommended for most testing in clinics, both pre and post testing. And here the idea is that without this counseling and or medical supervision, the consumer will not understand the results, and that may lead to too drastic or too lax measures. So this is a very important part of genetic testing, understanding the results, even understanding if you want the test to begin with. And it's also considered one of the most expensive parts of genetic testing. So it might not be surprising that companies have not gone there yet, but even if they did hire genetic counselors, we'd have to wonder about their impartiality. And even if the genetic counselors are trained to interpret all of these new genetic tests. So I'm going to move along a bit faster now, but you'll have the slides later on if you want to look at them. Informed consent is an issue here because the interaction, especially without the physician, happens all over the internet. So the question is, there enough information given to consumers so that they know and understand what they're buying? They really understand the risks and the benefits, and do they understand that the information they get might affect their family members? So this is a huge concern, and of course it relates to testing in minors and some of the research activities of these companies, which I'll get to very soon. I have another slide that is basically just there to tell you that we already have concerns about informed consent with whole genome sequencing in the clinic and in research in the academic setting. So you add those concerns to the direct-to-consumer context and you get a lot more concerns, and I could give a talk just about that, just something to keep in mind. So the research activities of companies have also been a concern because they are using consumer data to create biobanks to do research, basically. And our questions, we studied these companies to see if they were really letting the consumers know that their data was going to be used for research, and if they did let them know, if they were really obtaining a proper informed consent. We did this analysis a while ago already, in 2010, and of companies, I think most of which are not in business anymore, but basically we found that many companies only said that they were doing research in the fine print, in the way back pages, and those companies that were quite transparent about the fact they were doing research, the consent was not equal to the consent that we expect from research subjects in academic research. So we have to wonder there, is this double standard okay? Is that okay just because they're a company, they're allowed to do research in a way that we wouldn't necessarily let them do an academic genomic research? And there's some obvious answers to that question. But others that are less obvious because there really is a blurring here. The person gets on the internet as a consumer and then somehow becomes a research participant. That needs to be taken into consideration. So it's important that these companies be clear and transparent and obtain proper consent, because if they don't, consumers might, it might undermine public trust in genetic research, and the consumers or the public might not see the difference whether it's a company or an academic institution. So I think as stakeholders in genetics, we would not want that to happen overall. Genetic testing in minors is also concerned because guidelines, present clinical guidelines, say that for predictive genetic testing, it is only recommended in minors if there's an established, effective, and important medical treatment that can be offered, and if not, it should be delayed until the minor is old enough to make an informed choice. And what's happening now is that companies, these are just some studies where we did some empirical work studying this, they are testing minors, and so there is a double standard. We are asking clinicians not to do this, yet we're letting these companies test minors. So is that okay? One of the last topics now, before I skip over a couple more slides, is the challenge of the healthcare system. And some people don't think of this because they're thinking, well, if it's out of pocket, let the consumer do whatever they want to do. But if the consumer buys a test, genetic test that they didn't understand the result of, and there's a lot of results, right? It's not just one, there's a lot. For 23andMe, it was over 200 phenotypes they were giving back. So, or results for phenotypes. So if a consumer does not understand these results and they decide to do follow-up testing with their GP, who doesn't necessarily understand the results either, and schedules more follow-up testing, this could potentially overburden the medical system, the publicly funded medical system. And we did a study, a survey of clinicians in Europe, and we saw that although it was not the majority of clinicians, but a good amount of them, 44%, had patients come to see them after they had undergone a direct-to-consumer genetic test. So it is happening, and this was already, I think, in 2011. So one could assume that this might be higher now. So I think it's a very probable concern for the future. Privacy and confidentiality looks a lot like, the concerns here look a lot like what we see in the clinic. How is the data kept? For how long is it going to be kept? Who will get to see it? Are the companies transparent to the consumers about how this is done? But there's other ones that are less obvious, and this is the last one in the list here, and the little, it goes with a little Nature correspondence there about genetic testing, anonymity of sperm donors under threat, because what we found is that kids conceived through donor gamete conception have in fact found back their gamete donor, and through the help of some of these companies, because some of these companies encourage their consumers to share the genetic data and see, hey, are we related, etc. So that's something that should be known if some clinics, although this varies also in the world, some clinics like to or can give anonymity or promise anonymity to their sperm donors, but it might not be the case with these companies, and that should be known if they're going to be used more and more. Okay, so control. I'm going to end here, and basically control can be done through laws, but it can also just be done through guidelines. And also, there's a lot of different things that can be controlled. The labs doing the tests, the way the tests are offered through a doctor, not through a doctor, or the way the tests are advertised. And you can even control the consumers, which is what France did. There's a fine for consumers who purchase direct-to-consumer genetic testing in France. It's a couple of thousands of euros, I think. Not sure how that will be enforced, but it's there in their law. So there's a lot of guidelines, specifically, not specifically about genetic testing, but specifically about direct-to-consumer genetic testing, which is interesting if you think about it. So genetic societies have put out their ideas, other medical professional societies that are non-genetic, bioethics committees. So there's a lot of guidelines out there. If you want to know more about that, we even have compilations of them on some of our websites. And of course, there's some laws that are already existing about either medical services or genetic services that encompass direct-to-consumer genetic testing, that could encompass them. There's some countries like France, Germany, and Portugal that have banned direct-to-consumer genetic testing. Other countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, and Switzerland, where things are just changing, where companies could possibly operate. So that's all I'm going to say about laws, but do look for the future. In Europe, we have an IVD regulation that is coming, that could come in, a proposal to change the IVD, the in vitro medical diagnostic directive that was there in the past. And here, some proposals are suggesting that advertisement, direct-to-consumer genetic testing, advertisement be completely banned, and that genetic testing should only be provided through a medical doctor. So this has not gone through yet, but it could. So stay tuned. Same thing with the FDA that has cracked down a bit more on 23andMe now, and I'm not sure if it's contacted other companies, but I'm sure that's going to pave the way for that relationship to either strengthen or weaken between the FDA and direct-to-consumer companies. So I've actually said all of my conclusions, but I also want to just remind you that other self-testing tests have exist already, and they have been regulated, but there was a way to go ahead responsibly, and I hope we can do that for genetic testing. So thank you, and couple of seconds for Q&A. So let me take a look. Oh. Okay. So it would appear that there are no questions, or I don't have access to the questions. And maybe that's because I went over time. Well, if you have any questions, you can email me. The organizer is typing in a message to me now. Maybe it's got to do with your questions or lack thereof. Oh, so thank you very much for your attention. Good night.